The General Hospital spoilers for Wednesday, July 16th, suggest that Michael Corinthos will be tempted to leave Port Charles with Sasha Gilmore Corbin and the kids. Screaming Portia Robinson will also lose her cool as her rage rises, so there will be some intriguing developments on the ABC soap. For openers, Trina Robinson will tell Jocelyn Jacks about her breakup with Kai Taylor, revealing his betrayal and her BFF's rage. Meanwhile, Stella Henry will express her unhappiness in a conversation with Curtis Ashford. Stella appears to be questioning Curtis about his marriage and pressuring him to fix it, but he will keep an eye on the most recent Drew Kane developments. Drew will reassure Willow Tate about getting her children back and beating Michael at his own game. Drew will carry out a vindictive plan in the hopes that Willow will be returned to custody. Michael will understand he, like Sasha and Daisy Gilmore, has the option of leaving Port Charles. Michael will be tempted to go with Wiley and Amelia Corinthos to be with Sasha and their little sister. Tracy Quartermaine is unlikely to agree to that plan, which is why she may ask Jason Morgan for a favor on Wednesday's GH episode. Tracy may press Jason to persuade Michael to stay with Amelia and Wiley, particularly for Monica Quartermaine's sake. Next, Sasha will inform Nina Reeves about all of the strange Daisy incidents, including the kidnapping ruse. Because Sasha believes someone is attempting to demonstrate how near they can get to Daisy, she feels compelled to leave town. Nina will be outraged by Sasha's story and blame herself for Daisy's danger. This could be related to Sonny Corinthos, as Nina recently spoke with Tracy the importance of safeguarding their loved ones from his mob violence. Of course, fans are aware that Willow is responsible for all of the Daisy drama, so we'll see how long that secret can be kept. Finally, Portia will feel compelled to vent her frustration. Something will reportedly push Portia over the limit, causing her to yell and destroy stuff behind closed doors at GH. According to General Hospital spoilers, Portia will face additional challenges in the near future, but Isaiah Gannon may provide some relief soon. Tracy Quartermaine exploited Nina Reeves' Drew Kane desire against her, according to the General Hospital spoilers for Tuesday, July 15th. Marco Rios' escape went badly. Willow Tate had a fight with Michael Corinthos on GH, who eventually disclosed that the visitation hearing had been rescheduled due to her conduct at the pool. Willow was shocked to see that it was now taking place in October and slammed Sasha Gilmore Corbin for failing to speak out against Michael. Willow learned about an international trip at Daisy Gilmore's checkup. Willow was frightened that Michael was planning to take her children out of the country, but he snapped that he wasn't. After Daisy's exam, Michael had a beautiful moment with Sasha and said he will miss both of them. Tracy met Nina at the Quartermaine home for tea after summoning her for a proposition. Tracy wanted Nina to utilize her media contacts to influence the voting on Measure C and drive Sonny Corinthos out of town. Nina pretended to need some persuasion to consider it, suggesting Tracy could persuade Michael to give Willow access to the children. Tracy decided they'd have to do it the hard way, so she threatened to tell Willow about Nina sleeping with Drew behind her back if Nina refused to cooperate. Nina eventually submitted, but she murmured to herself about not forgetting it, saying Tracy messed with the wrong bitch. Afterward, Nina stayed to visit Sasha and the baby, which Sasha appreciated because it allowed her to say farewell. Nina was startled to learn that Sasha was leaving Port Charles with Daisy. Later, Michael ran into Tracy, who was shocked to find he was losing his daughter since Daisy needed to be securely out of town. Meanwhile, Jason Morgan assigned a guard to watch Marco and cautioned him not to let their hostage leave. The guard erred by allowing Marco to deceive him into believing he required food due to his diabetes. When the door opened, Marco hurled a chair against the guard and attempted to flee. At the chapel, Jen Sidwell interrogated Sonny about Marco, but Sonny advised he should be asking how to get his son home safely. Sidwell claimed that Selena Wu was to blame for the pub fire, but Sonny refused to believe it and asserted that Marco's condition was caused by Sidwell. If Sidwell wanted to help Marco out of trouble, Sonny expected him to withdraw money from Measure C, halt all political activities against him, and end the media attacks. When Lucas arrived at the church and discovered Jason, he pressed Marco for an answer. Jason stonewalled Lucas, who responded by lashing out at him. Lucas hurled threats at Sonny once he emerged from the church, but Sonny seemed unconcerned. Sonny merely told Lucas to do what he had to do and walked away. Lucas followed Sidwell inside, so Sidwell asked for his assistance in getting through to Sonny. Lucas, on the other hand, maintained that Sidwell should be the one to save Marco because he had previously tried. When Jason returned to the warehouse where Marco was being held, the guard appeared roughed up. Jason inquired about what had occurred, but the guard assured him that it was nothing he couldn't handle. Back with Marco, he was now chained and gagged inside the chamber he was held in, indicating that his escape attempt had failed. Drew went to Carly Spencer and asked her for help. When it became evident that a compromise would not be reached, Drew threatened to attack Michael. Drew arrived at the hospital in a state of stress since Willow's visitation hearing had been pushed back to October. Drew hugged Willow and promised her that they would soon have everything they needed to take the kids away from Michael permanently. According to General Hospital spoilers, Drew will play dirty against Michael, so stay tuned for updates on all of the next power plays. Michael Corinthos never expected that leaving Port Charles would feel like the most reasonable decision. But as time passed, his life in this town grew increasingly stressful, fraught with deception, expectations, and grief. There was a time when the history of his family and the morals he grew up with were everything. Now everything felt like a trap. Sasha's calm presence and their children's joy had become the only aspects of his life that seemed genuine, healing, and free of the mayhem that marked the Corinthos name. So, the thought of leaving had softly crept into his head. Not just for the weekend. Not just for clarity. For good. Michael hadn't spoken the words aloud yet, but they lingered on his tongue whenever he gazed across the living room at Sasha, her eyes exhausted but hopeful as she tucked Amelia into bed or calmed Wiley after a bad dream. Her tenacity astounded him. She had been through so much. Addiction, loss, public scrutiny, and still chose love. Still she gave. He'd crushed her heart before, distancing himself after her overdose and instead focusing on Willow and Wiley. But now everything had changed again. Sasha had become a constant. And given Willow's frigid detachment following her recovery and the developing schism between them, Michael recognized something terrible and liberating. He didn't need to mend what was broken with Willow. He could start over. He could create something new with Sasha and the kids, away from the never-ending judgments and high-stakes games that dominated Port Charles. The temptation was not purely emotional. It was also practical. ELQ was now steady, and he had delegated many of his responsibilities. He had cash, connections, and options. He may find a home in a tranquil place, perhaps along the shore or perhaps abroad. The prospect of rearing his children somewhere away from the web of secrets and falsehoods that enveloped the Corinthos and Quartermain lineages offered him a sense of calm he hadn't felt in years. Michael had spent so much of his life trying to balance his biological father A.J. Quartermain's world and Sonny's, two men on opposing sides of the moral compass, each damaged in their own way. And now, as Sonny's empire crumbled and Drew's manipulations became more obvious by the day, Michael realized that no part of that world had a place in his children's lives. Of course, the decision was not simple. Willow was still keeping her distance, but she was attempting in her own quiet way to keep the kids' lives as normal as possible. There was Carly, whose loyalty was strong, but who never understood why Michael would walk away from everything. There was Ned, who saw it as a betrayal to hand up control of the family business to others. And then there was Jason, who had finally returned from the dead, and his presence evoked a mix of love and loyalty in Michael, making him hesitate. Even Jason, with his stoic knowledge and sense of duty, appeared fatigued now. Tired of fighting for a town that eats its own. Tired of seeing good intentions perverted by power and fear. Michael hadn't forgotten how much it had cost his family to keep Sonny in control, nor the anguish Willow had felt as he joined up with Dex to seek information against his father. That decision had cost him dearly, personally, morally, and emotionally. Even though Sonny now understood the full truth, the harm was irreversible. Not really. Michael had spent a long time trying to make everyone else happy. Now all he wanted was to give his children a fresh start. Sasha had not asked him to leave Port Charles. She never even mentioned it. But he could see it in her eyes at times, especially when they took the kids to the park and she watched other families laugh without looking behind them. He saw it when she mentioned her late son, Liam, and the calm location she used to fantasize about visiting simply to feel like she could breathe again. She would never force Michael to choose her over his roots, but she was a dreamer below all her power. Michael began to wonder if he was finally ready to dream again. Wiley had caught up on the tension. He was astute like that. Despite Michael and Willow's efforts to keep their problems hidden from him, youngsters are always aware. Wiley just began asking more questions. Why didn't Daddy sleep in the same room with Mommy? Why was Mommy crying in the shower? Why did Sasha come over so often? These were not the kinds of inquiries Michael could avoid. Every time he avoided a response, he felt as if he was sowing seeds of confusion in his son's mind, just like the ones he grew up with. He didn't want Wiley to grow up resenting those he was meant to love the most. He desired honesty, simplicity, peace. Sasha recently picked up Wiley from school. Willow was meant to, but she was called to an emergency meeting at the hospital. Michael was at ELQ, dealing with an unexpected situation involving an investor. Sasha stepped forward without reluctance. When Michael returned home that evening, he found them all on the floor, constructing a Lego tower that nearly reached the ceiling. Wiley had addressed Sasha as Mama Sash, and though he quickly rectified himself, Michael noticed the faint blush on Sasha's cheeks and the gleam in her eyes. It was not weird. It was natural. And it hurt Michael's heart a little because he knew that the love he had worked so hard to rebuild with Willow had quietly moved on to someone else. Someone who had always turned up, no matter how shattered she was inside. There were other moments of clarity in the smallest details. Sasha's smile when the kids painted her face, the way she nestled near Michael on the couch without needing to break the silence, the way she never judged his decisions even when he couldn't forgive himself. She had seen his darkest sides, his wrath, despair, and anger. Yet she still stayed. She never made him feel inferior for doubting himself. She just reminded him that love didn't require perfection. It was about being present. Port Charles had become a place of shadows. Ghosts followed him everywhere. Of those he'd lost, injured, and betrayed. The tension between Nina and Carly. There are never-ending resentments in the Quartermain household. The dysfunction that no amount of money or power could fix. Michael had tried to rise above it, to serve as a bridge between warring factions, but perhaps he was never meant to. Perhaps he was intended to take a different path and eventually let the war end. One evening, as the sun set below the horizon and cast a warm golden tone over the living room, Michael sat near Sasha on the couch, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. The kids were upstairs, with Wiley finally asleep and Amelia chatting peacefully in her bed. The home was still. Peaceful. Michael stared at Sasha and said, almost scared to disturb the peace, "Do you ever consider leaving?" She did not respond right away. She sat up slowly, meeting his gaze. "All the time," she admitted without shame. "But I never thought you would." His throat clenched. He had not expected such blunt honesty, but it was the authorization he required. Someone else in his life wasn't clutching to Port Charles as a lifeline. Someone others saw a route out and didn't hesitate to take it. They didn't discuss it further that night. But something changed. Michael then proceeded to quietly look at maps. At school. Properties. He wasn't running, at least not in the way that others would describe. He was making a choice. And for once it would be his decision, not a reaction to someone else's error. He adored Willow. He always would. But love was not always enough. Not when the trust was vanished. When the bond had deteriorated into silent cordiality and obligation. Willow deserved more than a half-hearted dedication. She deserved someone who could be completely present in the life they were creating. Michael realized now that he wasn't that man. Maybe he'd never been. And Sasha? She never requested anything. But she offered everything. Her love was quiet and steadfast, based on shared pain, mutual respect, and a type of redemption that could only be found through deep understanding. With her, he did not feel like a Corinthos or a Quartermain. He felt like Michael. Just Michael. A father. Partner. A man seeking a better life. The thought of leaving still terrified him. There were countless what-ifs. There are so many people he may hurt. But the temptation had turned into a promise. A glimpse of something beautiful just beyond his remorse. And for the first time in a long time, Michael dared to think that he could provide a life for his children in which love was not transactional and devotion was not a burden. Just love. Just life. And maybe, just maybe, that was the future he and Sasha were intended to build. Away from the town that taught them how to survive and finally in a place where they might learn to live. Tracy had always taken pleasure in her ability to play the long game. But recently she felt as if the chessboard of Port Charles had become more unpredictable. She had been keeping an eye on Nina for weeks, ever since she learned about Nina's foolish night with Drew. Tracy hadn't planned on using the knowledge at first, but now that she had the opportunity to reclaim leverage in many directions, she wasn't going to waste such a powerful weapon. It wasn't only about Nina. It was about power, control, strategy. Tracy was tired of watching as everyone else lied, schemed, and slept with the enemy. She hadn't expected Drew to be so easily persuaded, but men usually relax their guard when they think no one is looking. Tracy witnessed it in business takeovers, personal treachery, and backstage hospital politics. Drew Kane, for all his swagger and charisma, was simply another pawn masquerading as a king. She patiently waited for Nina to step out of line. And when she did, when she dared to speak with authority on a subject that jeopardized Tracy's position, it all came crashing down. Tracy made certain of it. She did not reveal what she knew plainly. No, that would be too obvious. She dropped hints. A smirk here. A knowing look there. Until Nina's confidence started to dwindle. Nina knew Tracy was after her. The guilt was already nibbling at her conscience, especially because Willow still had no idea. And Sonny, God help her if he ever learns. Tracy didn't have to reveal anything herself. All she had to do was apply the right amount of pressure at the appropriate time. Nina, let the terror overtake you. Allow her to unravel. In the meantime, Tracy may earn money by remaining silent. But Nina, cornered and desperate, didn't remain quiet for long. She attempted to confront Tracy and demanded to know what she wanted. You've had your fun, Nina hissed, attempting to keep her voice steady. What are you after? Tracy did not even blink. You understand what I want. I want control back at ELQ. And I want you to stop pretending to be a converted saint. I will not tell Sonny. Yet. But if you cross me, he'll be the first to know where you were that night. In the meantime, Drew was spiraling. He didn't intend for that night with Nina to signify anything. At least, that's what he told himself. It was a time of vulnerability, loneliness, and confusion. He had felt abandoned by everyone. And Nina had been present. She had not made any judgments about him. She had listened. One drink went into two, and before either of them could think straight, something happened. A single night. But the ramifications were far more complicated than he had anticipated. He wanted to move on, to put that night behind him, and to focus on mending his relationship with Willow and the Quartermaines. But Tracy's involvement made this impossible. She was spreading whispers, and those words had weight. People began to look at him differently. Others questioned his loyalty. Others questioned what else he was hiding. The tension in the Quartermaine mansion was strong enough to cut with a knife. Brooke Lynn had begun asking questions. Olivia was on edge. Even Ned, who was still recuperating from his recent memory loss, noticed the alteration. Drew couldn't get the feeling that Tracy was watching him, waiting for a blunder. Nina became increasingly alone. Her usual allies, Ava, Sasha, and even Carly, in her more merciful moods, maintained their distance. Nobody trusted her anymore. They realized something was wrong, and Nina, who was never excellent at concealing her guilt, couldn't maintain her cool. Nina's concern, however, paled in comparison to Marco's. His departure from Pentonville had been hasty, badly planned, and worst of all, motivated by vengeance. He wasn't simply seeking to break free. He was looking to settle a score. He blamed Sonny for his imprisonment, and once released, he made it his mission to hold Sonny accountable. Marco had aid on the inside, but it vanished the instant he went outside the gates. His getaway car was late, and when it did arrive, the driver was not who he expected. It was a setup, a decoy. Within minutes, Marco recognized he had been duped. By the time he entered the city boundaries, every cop in Port Charles had his photo on a wanted list. He slept low in a dilapidated building near the docks, nursing a gunshot wound and filled with rage. He requested favors from those who owed him, but even they were afraid to assist. Word had spread that Sonny Corinthos had placed a bounty on Marco's head. Anyone found helping him would face the penalties. Nonetheless, Marco was nothing if not resourceful. He changed hideouts every night, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. He sent cryptic messages to erstwhile associates, taunting Sonny and trying to lead him into a trap. But Sonny didn't bite. He was waiting just like Tracy. Marco's idea, however, was time-sensitive, and his injury slowed him down. He became increasingly reckless and desperate as the days passed. He stormed into a pub where Brick was meeting with a contact, wanting to provoke a conflict, but Brick was prepared. A fight broke out and Marco narrowly fled, injured again and with even more opponents watching his every step. Back at the hospital, Sonny was attempting to keep things together. He was aware of Marco's escape, of course, but he had more pressing issues. Nina was acting strangely. Drew dodged inquiries. And Jason was not returning my calls. It felt as if the walls were closing in. Sonny confronted Nina one night, demanding to know what was happening. She attempted to lie. She always did. But he saw through it. He didn't know the whole truth yet, but he could smell betrayal. And in Sonny's perspective, betrayal was unforgivable. Marco eventually made his move at the 4th of July festivities. He camouflaged himself and blended with the crowd at the Metro Court. His strategy was simple. Wait for Sonny to walk outside and then take him out. However, nothing went according to plan. Initially, a security guard recognized him. Then somebody screamed. Chaos erupted. Marco attempted to escape but stumbled. His wound was worse than he'd admitted. He never got to the roadway. A gun rang out, and he dropped on the steps of the Metro Court. Sonny watched as cops surrounded Marco's body. He did not flinch. He did not even blink. Another threat eliminated. Another name removed from the list. But something about it didn't seem right. He had seen that look in Marco's eyes before, desperation and terror. It wasn't just vengeance. Marco had been fleeing another threat as well. Later, when Dante handed him the preliminary report, Sonny hardly read anything. Marco was dead. This should have been the end of it. But as the fireworks blazed overhead, Sonny's thoughts returned to Nina, Drew, and everything that didn't add up. Tracy grinned as she poured herself a glass of brandy, while watching the events unfold from the mansion. Nina's dread, Marco's death, and Drew's guilt all served her goal. And now, with her adversaries dispersed and uncertain, she could finally plan her next move. LQ was in reach. The balance of power in Port Charles was changing. Tracy was ready to reclaim her crown. Nina tried again to approach Drew. She pleaded with him to come clean and speak the truth before Tracy distorted it beyond recognition. Drew refused. He stated that too much damage had already been done. Willow was finally healed. Michael was finally starting to trust again. Telling the truth would ruin the little tranquility they had left. Nina did not believe him. She assumed he was protecting himself, not Willow. And perhaps he was. But it wasn't important anymore. The secret was out there. Tracy had it. And secrets in Port Charles seldom remained hidden for long. The fallout started slowly. A murmur here, a snarky remark there. By the end of the week, half of the town knew. Of course, Tracy was too savvy to tell the entire story. She let the details to seep like poison, infecting everything they touched. Drew found himself excluded from meetings. Nina couldn't get a response from Sonny. Willow, sweet, trusting Willow, began asking questions she didn't want answered. Nina glanced at her reflection in the darkened room. She did not recognize the woman staring back. She believed she had changed. She thought she could create something fresh with Sonny. But she had broken it again. And this time she was unsure whether it could be fixed. Tracy had won for now. But even she realized the game wasn't finished. The real war has barely begun. And in Port Charles, the past always seems to rise from the dead.